Hello, I'm Andrew Lawrence King, and today I'm talking about conductors. We might not think of a conductor as being an early music instrument, but there's not much point in having an ensemble with period instruments and singers who are historically informed, only to direct them using post-romantic modern techniques. The origin of our modern term conductor is in medieval Latin conductus. This is music written in a rhythmic style to keep everybody together as they walk around the church. For this conductus music, they wrote texts in strong rhythms that would suit this kind of rhythmic music. And once you're singing rhythmically, it's easier to improvise polyphony. In medieval French, the word conduit also means conduct, the way you behave, the way you conduct yourself. The Psalms say we should walk in the way of the Lord and not in the way of the ungodly. And there is a line here all the way to John Dowland in 1609, who says, "Above all things, keep the equality of measure, for to sing without law and measure is an offence to God himself." Around the year 1600, the responsibility for organising musical performances is carried perhaps by a maestro di cappella in sacred music, or by a chorago, the artistic director of a show, in the case of the early operas. There are many aspects to that work. There's the organisational work of getting the people together, deciding who will sing which part, all those kind of things. There's also the work of teaching the style and making artistic decisions. I'm not talking about those aspects of the director's job, but rather about what one actually does during the performance or during a run-through in rehearsal while making music. So I'm thinking of the conductor's hand as an early instrument which we can use with historical techniques. There are two questions here. Who is waving their hand, and what are they doing with it? Iconographical evidence and period treatises support each other in showing that it's usually singers who wave their hands. Instrumentalists have their hands occupied. There's usually not a standalone conductor. The essential movement is down and up, with the palm outwards. There are several variations described in various treatises, but the majority of descriptions show this simple down and up. Around the year 1600, that will be down for a minim and up for a minim in duple time. In triple time, the downstroke is longer than the upstroke. 1, 2, 3. Violinists and keyboard players are recommended to do a similar down-up movement with the foot, since the hands are busy. Theorbo players can wave the end of the instrument's long neck down and up. Mersenne tells us that the typical speed of this beat is about 1 second each way, down for a second, up for a second. Of course, they didn't have digital watches or digital metronomes or any kind of metronome. So this 1 second beat is a humanist tempo. It's what you can remember as down and up, 1 second each way, not a digital measurement. And Zacconi says that it doesn't matter if you get it a little bit wrong. What does matter is to keep it very stable. Zacconi says that this beat can be called battuta, a beat. It can also be called misura, the measure, because it measures out time. It can also be called tempus, time itself. This is not some kind of interpretation of music. This is just a visual representation of time itself. The time we're talking about is not Newton's time, it's Aristotle's time. A number of motion to do with before and after. So time and movement are completely connected. And in music, they're connected by this hand movement, which is also called tactus, a touch. Zacconi says that the tactus is regular, solid, stable, firm, clear, sure, fearless, and without any perturbation. That's a high standard for every modern day director of early music to aim for. The person who administers the tactus is not necessarily the director, in the same way that the person with their hands on the wheel of a ship is not necessarily the captain. It's just a steers person. Similarly, in the theatre director himself is not necessarily going to be standing backstage with a headset running the show in real time. It changes our experience of making music if the job of keeping regular time is given to a rank-and-file singer or musician. The historical practice of tactus beating is preserved in the North American tradition of shape note singing. The person beating time is not interpreting the music or putting their personal stamp on the performance, but simply providing a visual signal of regular time as reliably as they can. The historical philosophy of the music of the spheres says that the music we play and sing here on earth is an imitation of the heavenly music created by the perfect movement of the stars and heavenly bodies. So this movement that we make with our hands is an imitation of the hand of God turning the wheels of the universe. This perfect heavenly music and our earthly music making were also related to the harmonious nature of the human body, a microcosm of the entire creation. The steady movement of the tactus hand, the continual beat of the pulse, reflect the eternal movement of the heavens and are reflected in the way we make music. If your pulse stops, the music also dies. Even though the tactus has this character of being so equal and stable and never changing, it does sometimes change. Frescobaldi explains how to square that circle. Different movements can have slightly different speeds. You can take a slower speed for a very expressive movement full of affetti. You can take a slower speed if there's very elaborate diminutions. So the tactus does vary from one section to another, and Frescobaldi explains how you use the tactus to navigate from one section to the next. He says that the tactus can be different speeds for different movements, and it can sometimes hesitate in the air. And so between movements, you stop on the last note, hesitate, and set off directly into the next movement. It might be faster, or after the hesitation, it might be slower. As we change from duple to triple rhythm, the idea of proportions is that the underlying tactus remains the same. 1 and 2 and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nevertheless, Praetorius and later Carissimi suggest that when you make a slow proportion, 1, 2, 3, you might make it extra slow. And when you make a fast proportion, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you might make it extra fast. This is the same idea that is described by many writers, which is that this tactus might vary according to the emotion, according to the affetto. So if we have an agitated affetto, we could go with a faster tactus, and if we have a languid affetto, we would go with a slower tactus. The effect of this will be to exaggerate the contrasts that the composer has already written, because if the text is agitated, the composer will have written fast notes, which we take with a faster tactus. If the text is languid, the composer will have written slow notes, and we take those with a slower tactus. For this reason, the adjustment of the tactus from one movement to another will tend to be a tweaking of the tactus, just a subtle change. If the composer wants the music to go twice as fast, he can just write it in smaller note values. Different genres of music require different solutions for tactus beating. Music from multiple choirs might have multiple tactus beaters relaying the beat across the distance from one choir to another. In opera, Il Corago tells us that staged opera was not conducted. There was no beat, because it would be very distracting for the audience to see this down and up all the way through a long production. Agazzari tells us that in large-scale concerted music, it's the continuo instruments who support and guide the whole ensemble of instruments and voices. Galliano agrees in the preface to La Daphne, saying that it's the continuo who regulate the music. Where we have a violin band, the first violin might take responsibility for maintaining the tactus. Writing in 1698, Muffat tells us that in the dance style of Lully, right from the very beginning of each dance, you should recognize instantly what kind of dance it is, and the proper movement of that dance should be maintained all the way through to the end. He calls this le vrai mouvement, the true movement. And that doesn't just mean the speed, but it also means the groove of the dance and the swing of the inégale. In the middle of the 18th century, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach says that the harpsichord is the ideal instrument for directing. We should be careful about his meaning here. Sometimes in modern-day concerts, we see somebody directing from the harpsichord by using modern conducting whilst the instrument functions as a very expensive music stand. This is not what Carl Philipp Emanuel meant. When we direct from the first violin, from the theorbo, from any continuo instrument, we direct not by waving our hands, but by the way we play. Il Corago says that a continuo player can give a couple of beats at the beginning of a concerted movement to get everybody started. This is just an introduction. There are many more subtleties to be investigated. But there's a kind of paradox in today's early music that whilst we've investigated how to hold a Baroque violin and how to use the bow, we haven't spent as much time and effort looking at how a conductor holds their hand and how they move it to make the music. Perhaps we should. Thank you for listening. I'm Andrew Lawrence King, and that was Conducting.